Thank you. And I just want to say a very, very big kia ora to Jackie and Robin. It has been such a privilege working with them over the years. And as Mike well knows, when I get back to Canada every year, I wax quite lyrically about the lessons I've learned from the amazing work that's been done here and the way the research has been done. Being able to work on this data set is really a privilege and an honor. What you have managed to achieve collaboratively as a sometimes invisible team, but a team nonetheless, is remarkable in any research field, let alone in the field of young people facing really, really significant risks and challenges, where working with them isn't as seamless as it may be, for example, in a mainstream education setting or a medical setting. So what has been done here from a research perspective is quite phenomenal. So thank you very much. The problem with coming third in line is my friends and colleagues have said such wonderful things, and I'm trying desperately to hold on to all of it in my head to bring it into what I'm going to show you. But I think a good starting point is really to pick up on these 4 points and to say, or to give you a small demonstration of how we're seeing this in the data and how we can circle back to these 4 points. And again, quick question, I also like to talk with my hands. Am I doing okay with the microphone? If people in the back stop hearing me, just do this. That'll be our code for get the microphone back in place. Okay, so moving along. I think a great analogy can be drawn between young people falling or people falling from great heights, for example, out of a plane, and many of the young people that we're seeing in the study, and indeed many of the young people that you see as service providers. The safety of the machinery designed, the social and more professional machinery designed to carry young people from childhood through into adulthood to become happy, healthy, contributing members of society is in some way failing these young people. The aircraft is gone. So if we think of things like safe families, safe communities, safe school environments, something has been disrupted in that mechanism through a variety of ways. If we think of Mike's example with urban design, it could be that. It could be something in educational policy. It could be something in global economics and politics. But something has disrupted the machinery that's meant to be surrounding young people and keeping them safe and happy and healthy. And that's really where services come in. I'm going to return that to Jackie. So the aim of services really is to get young people out of this free fall and into a safer movement where they can have a safe landing. And that's positive and adaptive outcomes in life. Given the challenges that young people face, though, how we're weaving together the supportive threads of that kind of parachute become really, really important. And we need to consider the positioning of those supportive threads that facilitate the safety in young people's lives in relation to the risks that they're facing. And this is where this really, really beautiful quantitative data set comes in. And what I'm going to be presenting on here is from the New Zealand data. And I should mention on a side note that we see this pattern consistently across our other research sites, which is lovely because it's a really, really universal lesson that tells us across cultures and contexts this is something we really should be giving our attention to as service providers. So, how do we weave together effective threads in that parachute given the weaker threads that are in that? So what we see is, and I'm sure this is probably not a surprise to many people in this room, but the greater a young person's risks, the greater their contextual risks, or vice versa. So what we mean there is that when young people experience family spaces, school spaces, or community spaces as unsafe or dangerous, we're seeing an increase in individual risks, things like increased risk of depression or anxiety, increased engagement in substance use and abuse, increased engagement in dangerous behaviors, and in particular behaviors that could land young people in engagement with justice systems. So this is a correlation. I should say we're not seeing causality here. But what we are seeing is that as the one set of risks increases, we're seeing an important increase in the other set of risks. And it's quite a strong relationship. No surprises there. What we're also seeing, which is wonderful news, is that as risks directly related to the young person, so their internalized risks or their behavioral risks increase, we are seeing an increase in service provision. So we are providing young people with services when they themselves present with risks. We're also seeing, but to a much smaller extent, the provision of services when the risks are located in context. We are providing them, but to a lesser extent those services are there. But overall, I mean, that's a good news story in terms of service provision. We do need to ask ourselves, however, how are young people experiencing these services? And if you think back again to Mike's stories about the young man in Canada or the young people in Cambodia, you can start seeing how the relevance of services to young people becomes important, the extent to which they're finding services empowering and respectful, those kinds of aspects become quite important in our consideration. So if we add that to the mix, and we're seeing our red parachute being woven up here above the young person, we start to see a little bit of a worrying trend. First and foremost, the relationship between amount of services and the experience of services is negative, but it's really not very strong. It's a very, very small correlation, and if I remember correctly, it's not significant either. That's why it's a dotted line. So there's no correlation there. And also what's worrying is in almost equal amounts, the greater contextual or individual risks, the poorer a service use experience for a young person is going to be. So the more they're experiencing risks in their families, communities, or school spaces, or the greater the risks that they bring with them personally, such as substance use or risk of depression, the poorer their experiences of services are going to be. The less likely they are to experience services as relevant, respectful, and empowering. So why is that important? If we bring resilience into the mix, and if we go back to Mike's explanation of resilience, is these processes around young people, processes of navigation and negotiation that are embedded both within the individual and their environment, the relationships around them that help them do better. If we bring that into the mix, again, what we see, no surprises, the greater the risk, the less resilience processes are going to be around young people. And here, even though it's cross-sectional data, the kind of analysis that's being done here is more in the line of causality. Is that a volume question or a question? Good. Good point. Thank you for stopping me. So what we're seeing up here is contextual risk. That's not feeling safe in your family, in your community, or in your school space. So it's risks that are located in contexts. What we're seeing here are risks more directly located in and around the individual. So risk of depression, risk of acting out behavior, aggressive behavior, risk of engaging in dangerous behaviors such as substance abuse, and engaging in behaviors that increase likelihood of engagement with the youth justice system. This is service use accumulation, so it's number of services used. And what we've looked at here is across service use systems, as well as amount of services used within a system. So if you have been engaged, for example, with SIFs ever in your life, and the extent to which you have been engaged with services that fall under the rubric of SIFs. Does that help? Fabulous. So bringing these together, if we start looking at the positioning of resilience in this parachute above vulnerable multiple service using youth, what we see is that, interestingly, contextual risks have a much greater impact on resilience processes around young people than their individual risks. And that impact is negative. The greater the contextual risks around young people, the lower those resilience processes around them are likely to be. And that's really, really important if we look back up here and see that we're less likely to provide young people with services if their risks are located in their context than we are if their risks are located in themselves. That's that blue line here. We're much more likely to provide young people with services when they themselves manifest with risks. Yet it's their contextual risks that have a much greater impact on their resilience. So far, so good? Great. What's also really, really interesting, and this is where the exciting piece comes in, and this is where this really starts relating back to what Jackie and Mike were saying, is that services do have a positive impact on resilience processes. So it is a great thing that we are providing young people with services. We are bolstering their resilience processes. But what's really important is that the extent to which services themselves impact resilience processes is much smaller than the extent to which service use experience impacts resilience processes. So this very clearly starts suggesting that it isn't quantity but quality service provision that bolsters the resilience processes of young people. If we want this parachute to contain a lot more blue threads rather than red threads, we need to be providing services to young people in ways that are respectful and relevant and empowering. Put very simply, services need to make sense to young people. We've met with a lot of people across all sites where youth say, I'm sure that person could have been helpful to me if I'd understood who they were and what they could do for me. That level of relevance, a lot of young people are engaged with services where they don't understand why the service is in their lives and what it can do for them. So relevant. A lot of young people talk also about the need to have basic physical needs met before they can start dealing, for example, with their anger issues. So aligning the level of service provision with where young people are at. And we do that when we engage with young people in ways that are respectful, when we stop, make time for them, and hear them. And when we do that, we start developing a relationship with young people that they can experience as empowering, where they can see, going back to the example that Mike used of the young man in Canada, where he had a voice in what was happening to him, and he was part of working out redirecting his pathways from one that was going to lead to increased involvement in the justice system to one that got him re-engaged in school, reducing his levels of aggressive behavior. Having a voice in that for him was empowering. Yeah. Good. I don't know. I have a big data set of numbers, but I mean that's the exciting phase that this study is moving into now, is giving this information back to services so that services can start integrating this into service provision models. So I should mention it's tangential to what you've asked, but very important before we move away from this slide. These findings, very, very, very important caveat, particularly in today's political climate globally. This does not mean we should be cutting services. This does not mean we should be cutting funding to services. In fact, it may actually imply the reverse. If you think about the needs of young people, in an educational setting where there are 40 students in a class and a teacher having to deal with that. Or young people engaged with social workers who have a caseload from here into the next century. So this is really, really, really not a message of cut funding or reduce services. In fact, it could be quite the opposite message, that funding, resources for service provision, including funding, need to actually be bolstered so that frontline service providers, people engaged directly with young people, such as yourselves, that space is actually created for you to develop relationships with young people that are relevant, respectful, and empowering. Because if we do that, what we see is that once we've increased resilience, sorry for the people at the back, if we increase resilience processes, we really, really facilitate that safe landing for young people by increasing their functional outcomes. So there we're talking about things like school engagement, educational engagement, civic engagement, engagement in pro-social behavior. Just helping young people on that pathway to happy, healthy, and engaged adults, contributing adults. So that's what's at the bottom. We do see how these aspects of the parachute impact either negatively or positively on functional outcomes. The data does show that. I haven't included it here because all the relationships are quite weak, and it just clouds the model up. It starts messing with the whole parachute analogy. So I've taken them out. But there's a very big, clear, strong, positive relationship between increased resilience processes and increased functional outcomes. So really, the core aspect when young people are free-falling, and as service providers, we want to step in and provide them with a strong parachute that's going to move them safely from the space of free-falling and negative life outcomes into more controlled flying and improved life outcomes. We need to think about the ways we're providing services to young people that increase their resilience processes and increase their functional outcomes. What we're also starting to see in other parts of the data set and through other analyses is that a key component of improving the service use experience is in Jackie's 4 points of persistent service provision, collaborative service provision, what were the other two? Relationships and adaptability. Thank you. So in other ways of slicing the pie, we're starting to see that in order to improve this, that is what services need to do, which again in a tangential way comes back to what you were asking. And the ways in which services can change that very red, dangerous parachute where the young person is still struggling into a bluer parachute that's providing much more safety and security.